The vastness of space stretched endlessly before the Trivix Empire as they embarked on another routine mission far from the heart of their civilization. A distress signal had pierced the silence of the deep cosmos like a strange, uninvited voice that refused to be ignored. The signal was faint and distorted, but unmistakable enough to draw the attention of the Trivix fleet. They were accustomed to hearing distress calls from various worlds across the galaxy, but this one was different. Its encoding was unlike anything the Trivix had encountered before. At first, they assumed it was a malfunction or a fluke, but upon further investigation, their brightest minds confirmed that it was a deliberate transmission, a message from somewhere unknown, hidden within the stars. This intrigued them. The Trivix Empire was not a species easily caught off guard, and any signal that escaped their comprehension was a matter of great importance. It was rare for anything to threaten them, yet this signal held a mysterious weight they could not ignore. The signal emanated from a distant star system, one that was considered insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic affairs. Located in an uncharted region of space, the planet that sent the signal was a Class 4 world, not particularly advanced or dangerous, simply another small celestial body tucked away in the galaxy. The Trivix had catalogued it long ago, but its lack of remarkable features made it irrelevant to their ongoing expansion efforts. But now it seemed like the universe had decided to throw them a curveball in the form of a puzzling message. It was as if the galaxy itself had decided to test the might of the Trivix Empire by placing an unknown challenge before them. The fleet captain, General Sylar, could not allow his pride to be shaken by a simple unknown signal, and yet his curiosity pushed him to order an expedition to investigate the source of this mysterious call. It would be a simple task, he believed, a routine check of an unremarkable world, and yet as they drew closer to the system, a strange feeling crept over him. The further they traveled, the more unsettling the sensation became. The stars seemed to grow dimmer, the void seemed darker. It was as if the very fabric of space itself was warping with a strange sense of foreboding. The closer they got, the more the air aboard the Trivix flagship crackled with an unspoken tension. The crew was on edge. No one spoke it aloud, but they all felt the weight of something unknown drawing closer. When they finally reached the planet, the signal was gone, abruptly cut off, as though whoever had sent it knew the fleet was on its way. The silence that followed was deafening. The fleet hovered in orbit over the quiet world, and General Sylar issued orders to scan the planet and its surroundings. The atmosphere was stable, and the planet itself was covered in thick forests and vast oceans, nothing out of the ordinary. But the absence of the signal was unsettling. The strange feeling continued to gnaw at the edges of Sylar's thoughts as he stared out at the planet from his command deck. He knew one thing for certain, however: whatever had caused the signal to be sent was no simple occurrence, and whoever had triggered it had not anticipated what would come next. The Trivix Empire was about to uncover something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, something far beyond the capabilities of their greatest minds to comprehend, and far more than their advanced fleet could have prepared for. As the fleet lingered in orbit, they could not yet know that they were not alone in this dark corner of the galaxy. The humans, the Deathworlders, had already been watching, waiting for the moment to arrive. Their warships were cloaked in the vast emptiness of space, their eyes locked on the Trivix fleet as the game began to unfold. The Trivix fleet, now in orbit around the quiet planet, waited in an eerie stillness. The air inside the flagship was thick with anticipation. General Sylar paced across the command deck, his sharp eyes scanning the star charts and communications channels. But the silence of the planet below only deepened his unease. He had expected a simple investigation, yet now his instincts told him that something far more complex lay ahead. The signal had disappeared without a trace, as though it had been deliberately erased from existence. And yet the fleet remained in position. Its sensors were probing the planet, but there was nothing but empty space. The humans had been silent so far, but Sylar felt their presence, as though it loomed just beyond the veil of detection. It was at that moment that the first sign of danger appeared. The Trivix fleet's advanced scanners suddenly picked up an anomaly, a disturbance in the vast emptiness of space. Something moving at an incredible speed, undetected by their radar. It wasn't until the last second that a human warship emerged from the darkness, with terrifying precision. The sleek vessel cut through the void with unnatural grace, its hull gleaming in the dim starlight, like a predator closing in on its prey. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, its lines sharp and lethal. It was unlike any craft the Trivex had seen before. At first, the fleet's sensors couldn't identify it. It was almost as if the ship were playing tricks with their systems. The human vessel approached with calculated menace. Its presence was sudden and overwhelming. There was no time for the Trivex to react before the human warship was directly in their path. The atmosphere aboard the flagship shifted instantly. What had begun as an exploration had now turned into something far more dangerous. General Xylar's voice rang out, commanding control, but his confidence faltered slightly as he watched the human ship draw closer. It was a strange feeling to be on the receiving end of such an encounter. The Trivex had always been the ones in control, the ones who intimidated, but this human ship exuded an unmistakable air of threat and defiance. On board the human vessel, Captain Darius Kane stood in front of his crew, his expression unreadable as he observed the Trivex fleet from the viewscreen. He had known this moment would come. The humans had been watching the Trivex from afar for years, observing their movements and recording every detail. Now it was time to make contact to see just what the Trivex were truly capable of. Kane knew the galaxy feared humanity, but he had no illusions about the power of the Trivex Empire. They were formidable and calculating, but the humans were unpredictable. Their tactics were wild, their instincts feral. The communications channel opened. The Trivex flagship's massive presence filled the viewscreen as General Xylar's voice echoed across the airwaves. "This is General Xylar of the Trivex fleet. We have come to investigate the distress signal you sent. We demand to know your intentions." Captain Kane's response was immediate and calm. "We are here to investigate your investigation." He said the words cold and calculated, as though he were already several steps ahead of the Trivex. "Your distress signal brought us to this system, and now we need answers." Xylar's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp with suspicion. "We have come to offer assistance, not to be questioned by the likes of you." The tension hung heavy between them, neither side willing to back down. But before the conversation could escalate further, an unsettling silence gripped the vastness of space. An unknown presence seemed to watch them, both, as if the true game had only just begun. Kane stood tall, his eyes hard, sensing the game that was unfolding. The humans had their own reasons for being here, reasons the Trivex could never fully understand. The encounter was far from over, and both sides knew it. The battle of wits had just begun, and no one knew yet who would emerge victorious. The standoff in the silent vastness of space stretched on neither side, willing to make the first move. The tension was palpable as the two fleets faced each other in an unspoken stalemate. Captain Kane's gaze never left the Trivex flagship on the viewscreen. His crews stood ready, awaiting his orders. The human ship was still positioned at the edge of the fleet's formation, like a predator watching its prey. Every detail was being analyzed, every moment calculated to ensure their advantage. Kane knew that the Trivex fleet had come here with one goal, but they had no idea what they had truly walked into. General Xylar, on the other hand, was growing impatient. The silence on the Trivex flagship was deafening as his officers awaited a response from the humans. He had never been in a position like this. Before, the Trivex had never been challenged in such a direct manner. They were a race of tacticians and warriors used to controlling every situation, and yet here they were facing a species whose unpredictability seemed to defy logic. It made him uneasy. After what seemed like an eternity of cold silence, Xylar's voice broke through the airwaves. "We have no interest in conflict with you, human, but we will not be intimidated by your threats. Explain the purpose of your fleet, or we will have no choice but to act." Kane's lips curled into a slight smirk. His voice remained calm, but there was an underlying force behind it. "You've misunderstood our position, General. We're not here to threaten. We're here to ensure you're not walking into a trap." Xylar's confusion was palpable. "A trap? What are you insinuating?" Kane hesitated for only a moment before replying. "The distress signal you received wasn't what it seemed. It's part of a much larger scheme, one that's been set in motion for years, and you've just walked right into it." A ripple of unease ran through the Trivex fleet at Kane's words, and Xylar's mind raced. He had believed the mission to be straightforward, a simple investigation of a distress signal, but the humans were insinuating something far more sinister, and suddenly the pieces began to fall into place too neatly. The signal that had lured them here was not a cry for help, but a bait for something much more dangerous, something the Trivex could not yet comprehend. Before Xylar could respond, the Trivex sensors suddenly flared with alarming readings. An unknown fleet appeared on the edge of the system, their warships emerging from the shadow of a nearby asteroid belt. The fleet was massive, easily outnumbering the Trivex forces, and heavily armed. The ships were clearly not of Trivex origin, and yet their formation and discipline spoke of a military force far beyond the capabilities of ordinary raiders. Kane's eyes narrowed as he turned to his crew. Brace for impact, he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. The humans had expected trouble, but not on this scale. The raider fleet was not just a threat, they were an army, and their presence confirmed Kane's worst fears. The humans had been right. The signal had not been a distress call, it had been a trap designed to lure the Trivex fleet into an ambush, and the humans had been watching from afar, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The battle erupted almost instantly as the raiders fired on both the Trivex and human fleets. The chaos of the attack was immediate and relentless. The Trivex, though powerful, were caught off guard and quickly found themselves fighting on two fronts. Their ships maneuvered with precision, but the sheer scale of the enemy fleet and the unpredictability of the human tactics threw them into disarray. Kane's ships moved with calculated aggression, swarming the raiders with reckless abandon as the humans proved once again that their instincts and unorthodox strategies could turn the tide of any battle. In the midst of the chaos, Xylar realized that the Trivex were no longer in control. The humans had proven that in space they were just as dangerous as any force in the galaxy, and perhaps even more so. Kane's fleet was relentless, their unpredictability throwing the enemy off balance, and the Trivex knew they would have to adapt quickly if they were to survive. As the battle raged on, it became clear to both sides that this was no ordinary fight. This was a test of survival, and the humans were proving they could thrive in the chaos of combat, where others would falter. The Trivex would have to learn quickly if they were to keep up with the Deathworlders, but Kane had no intention of allowing them the luxury of time. The battle between the raider fleet, the Trivex, and the humans was like a living thing, each moment unfolding with unpredictable ferocity. The black void of space was lit up with explosions, the crackle of energy weapons, and the eerie hum of interstellar warships colliding in a deadly dance. The humans, with their chaotic, relentless tactics, proved to be a thorn in the side of the Trivex. The Trivex, known for their calculated precision and overwhelming power, were forced to adapt quickly, their ships weaving and dodging, trying to maintain control. Captain Kane's warship, the Vanguard, cut through the battle like a blade, darting in and out of fire, picking off raiders with surgical precision. His crew worked in perfect synchrony, every command met with a swift response. But Kane's eyes never left the Trivex flagship. He knew that the Trivex were not just any enemy. They were a formidable force, and their response to the surprise attack would decide whether the humans stood a chance. On the Trivex flagship, General Xylar was in a state of constant motion. His mind raced as he issued orders to reposition his fleet and counter the relentless assault from all sides. He had thought that the humans were just another force to be reckoned with, but their tactics, their audacity, had thrown him off balance. The Trivex were being pressed into a corner, and he had never been so aware of his own vulnerability. Xylar's gaze turned to the human fleet. They were everywhere, disrupting the raider formations, flanking the Trivex ships, and doing it all with an uncanny grace. He couldn't deny it. The humans were exceptional in battle. But their unpredictability was their greatest weapon, and it was a double-edged sword. The Trivex had their own strengths, their technological superiority, their discipline. But right now, they were losing the initiative. The realization hit Xylar hard. If they didn't adapt, they would not only fail to protect the system, but would also lose their fleet to the very same raiders they'd come to confront. For the first time in his career, Sylar knew the Trivex might need outside help, and not just from the humans. Captain Kane. Sylar's voice crackled over the comms, his tone a mixture of frustration and begrudging respect. We are in no position to continue this battle without your assistance. The raiders are too many and too well coordinated. We need to work together if we are to survive. There was a long pause on the other end before Kane's voice responded, calm and calculated as ever. That was never in question, General. But understand this, we're not here to play your games. We have our own agenda, and the moment this battle is over, we'll part ways. I'm here because you're in my way, and I'm not about to let anyone jeopardize the safety of this galaxy. You've crossed into a territory you don't fully understand, and if we don't deal with it together, we'll all be finished. Sylar's jaw clenched. He had no choice but to agree. The humans were right, as much as it irked him. This was no longer about diplomacy or formalities. It was about survival. The enemy they faced was far beyond their expectations. If they continued to fight separately, they would be overwhelmed. And there was no telling who the raiders might be working for. Very well, Sylar muttered, his voice harsh but clear. We will cooperate, but understand this. Once this is over, you will be on your own. Kane's voice remained steady. Agreed. Just make sure you don't get in our way. With that, an unspoken alliance was forged in the heat of battle. The humans, who had until now operated independently, now worked side by side with the Trivex forces. The once seemingly impenetrable Trivex fleet adapted their tactics to synchronize with the humans' chaotic, aggressive maneuvers. It was a clash of styles, but somehow, it worked. Together, they tore through the raider fleet, the Trivex ships firing in disciplined bursts, while the humans used their flexibility and unpredictability to exploit the raiders' weaknesses. The raiders, who had once been the hunters, were now the hunted. The human ships surged forward, their weapons flaring with devastating precision, while the Trivex engaged their massive artillery, pounding the raiders' defenses into submission. Within moments, the battle began to turn in their favor. The chaos, which had once threatened to swallow them whole, was now their advantage. But even as they pressed the attack, Kane knew this was only the beginning. The raiders were not the true threat. They were a distraction, a tool in someone's larger game. And the signal that had lured them all here was far from a simple cry for help. As the last of the raider ships fell silent, drifting into the dark void of space, Kane turned to face Sylar. This isn't over, General. The real enemy is still out there, and we're going to find them. Sylar nodded grimly, his mind already calculating the next steps. He could not deny the humans' effectiveness in battle. It was time to turn their reluctant partnership into something more. But in the back of his mind, he knew the Trivex had underestimated humanity, and that mistake could cost them more than they could imagine. The wreckage of the raider fleet drifted silently through space, their once menacing ships now little more than twisted metal and fading echoes of their brief existence. The Trivex and human forces stood victorious, yet the uneasy alliance between the two was far from settled. The aftermath of the battle hung heavily in the air. On the Trivex flagship, General Sylar surveyed the battlefield through the viewing windows, his mind working furiously as his officers gathered around, offering their analysis of the situation. The damage to their fleet was significant, but not catastrophic. The real cost, Sylar realized, was not in lost ships or energy reserves. It was in the uncertainty that had taken root in his mind. The humans had proven themselves capable warriors, unpredictable but effective, and their partnership had turned the tide of battle. But Sylar couldn't shake the suspicion that they had not been entirely forthcoming about their motives. Kane had spoken little of their true intentions, and Sylar knew better than to trust a human's words without understanding their purpose. "What now, General?" one of his senior officers asked, breaking Sylar's thoughts. Sylar turned, his gaze sharp. "We tracked down the source of the signal. We've seen what the raiders can do, but they were nothing more than pawns. The real threat lies beyond them. The humans know this, and they will not rest until they have answers. He paused, watching the human fleet, which had moved into position beside the Trivex warships. Kane's ships had suffered little damage, a testament to the humans' ability to maneuver under pressure. Xylar could feel the unease simmering beneath the surface of their newfound cooperation. The humans had already shown their hand. They wanted more than just a victory in battle. But what exactly was their stake in this strange, dangerous game? The communication channel to Kane's flagship buzzed alive. The familiar face of Captain Kane appeared on the screen, his expression unreadable as ever. General Xylar. Kane's voice rang out, calm but firm. It's time we moved forward. The raiders were a distraction. They were never meant to defeat us. Whoever sent that distress signal had a much bigger plan in motion. Xylar's jaw tightened. We know that. We've agreed to track down the source together. But you still haven't told me everything, Captain. What is it that you really want out of this? Kane's eyes locked onto Xylar, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to grow colder. What I want is simple, Kane said, his voice steady. I want to know who is behind this, who set the trap for you, for me, and for the galaxy. The raiders were just a means to an end. We're not here for glory or conquest. We're here because we know there's something worse out there. Xylar narrowed his eyes. He had known this was coming. Humans rarely played games for the sake of the game itself. There was always something more, something deeper beneath the surface. But what could be worse than the raiders? I see, Xylar said slowly, his mind turning the possibilities over. Then we are in agreement. We'll pursue this together. But know this, my fleet will not become your puppet. I'll share what is necessary. But the Trivex will remain in control of our path. Kane's lips quirked in a hint of a smile, though there was no warmth in it. I wasn't asking for control, General. I'm simply telling you that we don't have time to waste. Whoever is behind this will strike again. And next time, they won't send raiders. The call ended abruptly, and the Trivex captain was left staring at the black screen, his mind racing. Kane's words rang in his ears. They won't send raiders next time. Xylar's thoughts turned back to the signal, the source of the mystery that had drawn them all into this dangerous game. The distress signal had been too precise, too well-timed. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a beacon, guiding them into the web of someone's plot. But who? Meanwhile, aboard the Vanguard, Kane was already issuing orders. His crew had not missed the importance of the conversation. They had been monitoring the signals, analyzing the patterns of the raider fleet, and what they'd uncovered was both baffling and terrifying. The signal had been encrypted with a level of complexity that was far beyond the raiders' abilities. This wasn't some pirate faction. This was something much larger, much more organized. We'll need to start with the planet where the signal originated, Kane said, his voice cool. Whatever we find there, it'll point us to who is really behind this. As the human ships prepared to move out, Kane's mind was already racing. He knew the Trivex were good, too good to be played as pawns. But the humans had their own agenda, one that was slowly taking shape. The Trivex might not know the full story yet, but Kane wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. Whatever awaited them on that planet, it would hold the answers they needed, or the beginning of the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. The true enemy had not yet revealed itself, but it was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it did, the galaxy would be unprepared. The journey to the source of the distress signal was swift but tense. The human and Trivex fleets moved in tandem, their ships forming a formidable presence as they approached the remote planet that had been the origin of the mysterious transmission. Kane stood at the command center of the Vanguard, staring at the holographic map of the system. His eyes were focused, calculating. He knew the real enemy was out there, and they were running out of time to figure out who or what it was. General Xylar's fleet was close behind, a stark reminder that their alliance, while temporary, had become essential. The Trivex had proven their worth in battle, and now they were partners in this dangerous pursuit. Kane's thoughts were sharp, but there was a gnawing suspicion at the back of his mind. The Trivax might be strong allies in a fight, but how far would that cooperation go when they reached the truth of what lay beneath the surface? On the surface of the planet, something was waiting. The signals had stopped abruptly after the raider fleet was defeated, as though someone had been watching and waiting for the moment when both fleets were in close proximity. There was no telling what that meant, but Kane knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, they were walking straight into it. As the two fleets entered orbit around the barren world, a strange stillness settled over the scene. The planet, once believed to be a peaceful outpost, now appeared desolate, abandoned. But there was an odd energy in the air, something almost electric, crackling beneath the surface. Kane's instincts screamed that something was off. This wasn't the way things were supposed to unfold. The planet didn't feel like a place where life once thrived. It felt like a place where something had been erased. "We're approaching the designated coordinates," Kane said, his voice calm but laced with a sense of urgency. He turned to his crew, his hands clasped behind his back. "Prepare for a scan of the surface. I want to know everything about this planet, every hidden detail." Zyler's voice came through the comms with his usual authority. "Captain Kane, we are ready to engage if necessary. We've already deployed scouts to the surface." Kane nodded. "We'll need more than scouts, General. If anything is hiding down there, we need to know about it before we land." Zyler's fleet deployed several reconnaissance drones, sending them to the planet's surface, their sensors sweeping the barren landscape. The drones relayed images of a ruined city, structures that were ancient but too well preserved to be from a bygone civilization. As the feed expanded, it became clear that the city had been abandoned for centuries, but it also looked as though someone had been there very recently. Things were too carefully untouched, too deliberate in their state of decay. Then the first anomaly appeared. The drones began transmitting unusual energy readings from the center of the city. There, deep beneath the ruins, was a source of power, intense, undetectable, and completely foreign. The energy wasn't from any known technology in either the human or Trivax database. It was an unnatural pulse, rhythmic and hypnotic. Someone, or something, had deliberately hidden its presence. "This isn't just an abandoned planet," Kane muttered under his breath. His mind raced through possible explanations. "This is a place where something has been waiting, and it's still active." Zyler's voice was cold and clipped. "I suggest we land and investigate, Captain. We can't afford to let this go unchecked." Kane considered the proposal for a moment. He knew the Trivax were eager to maintain control, to take charge of the situation. But the humans had been right about one thing. The unknown was a dangerous thing to leave unchecked. "We'll land together," Kane said finally. "We're not taking any chances down there. If this is a trap, we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The decision was made, and both fleets began their descent toward the planet. The soldiers aboard the human and Trivax ships prepared themselves for the worst as their landing crafts deployed, cutting through the atmosphere, their descent guided by the strange energy signature that pulsed from below. As they approached the surface, Kane felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This wasn't just a military operation. This was a reckoning. A force older than anything either the humans or the Trivax had faced was watching them now, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And when the human and Trivax soldiers touched down on the surface, they would discover that they were not the first to set foot on this forsaken world. The enemy had been here long before them, watching, plotting, and now, preparing to rise again. The countdown had begun. The landing was smooth, eerily quiet as both human and Trivax forces deployed onto the barren, cracked surface of the planet. The air was thin and dry, a strange chill clinging to the atmosphere that seemed to whisper of forgotten things. Kane stepped out of the hatch of the Vanguard's landing craft, his boots sinking slightly into the dust, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The landscape before him was a wasteland of ruins, scattered remains of structures that hinted at once great architecture. But there was no sign of life, no movement, no trace of activity. Everything seemed frozen in time, suspended in an unnatural stillness. Beside him, General Xylar's elite soldiers disembarked, their glowing armor reflecting the dim light of the distant sun. They were trained for battle, but there was no battle to fight here. At least, not yet. Xylar himself stood tall, his sharp features betraying none of the unease that Kane could sense radiating from him. Xylar had no love for uncertainty, and this place, with its quiet danger, was nothing but a mystery. "Keep your scanners active," Kane ordered, his voice low but authoritative. "This place doesn't feel right. It's too quiet." Xylar nodded curtly, his mind already processing the situation. "Agreed. The power readings are off the scale. There's something below us, something ancient and powerful." Kane nodded, his fingers brushing against the edge of his weapon. They were deep in enemy territory now, though they didn't yet know who the enemy truly was. But the signal, the strange energy pulse, all pointed to something far greater than any of them had anticipated. As the team moved forward, the ruins loomed ahead, massive, almost monolithic structures that appeared to be carved from the rock itself, with symbols and markings that neither the humans nor the Trivax could recognize. The closer they got to the center of the city, the more intense the pulse became. The ground beneath their feet hummed with a low vibration, like the planet itself was alive, responding to their presence. Kane's eyes narrowed as they reached the heart of the city, where the energy source seemed to be concentrated. There, standing among the broken towers and crumbled walls, was a vast, metallic door, black as the void, with intricate engravings that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The markings were unlike anything he had ever seen, an alien script that was clearly not of Trivax or human origin. It was old, older than anything they had encountered. "This is it," Kane murmured, stepping forward cautiously. "This is what we came for." General Xylar's soldiers moved in formation behind him, weapons raised, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. But there was nothing. Just the strange hum, growing louder now, and the odd sense of being watched. Suddenly, the ground trembled, just slightly at first, then with increasing intensity. The massive door ahead of them began to shift, the engravings glowing brighter, almost pulsing in time with the vibration beneath their feet. The silence was broken by a loud metallic screech, as though something ancient and enormous was awakening from a long-forgotten slumber. "Move," Kane shouted. He drew his sidearm, but before he could take another step, the door burst open with a violent force, revealing a dark passageway beyond. From the depths of the tunnel, an eerie light began to spill out, casting long shadows across the desolate city. Kane's heart raced, his instincts screaming at him to act, to retreat, to protect his team. But his curiosity and the gravity of the situation kept him rooted in place. The energy was coming from inside that tunnel. Whatever lay within was the key to understanding everything. The raiders, the distress signal, the trap, all of it had been a diversion. This was the true objective. Xylar's voice crackled through his comms, calm but with a hint of caution. "Captain, we should proceed with caution. The energy readings." "I know, General," Kane cut him off, his voice tight. "We have no choice. We're already committed." They moved forward, step by step, deeper into the darkness. As they passed the threshold, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thick, the energy pulse now overwhelming. It was like walking into the heart of a living machine, a force older than the galaxy itself. The walls of the tunnel seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the symbols etched into them now glowing brightly, as though they were reacting to the presence of the humans and the Trivax. And then they found it. At the end of the passageway, within the heart of a massive chamber, stood a colossal machine. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a fusion of organic and mechanical elements, covered in the same strange symbols, a towering structure of unknown origin. It seemed to hum with life, its core glowing brightly, emitting an energy unlike anything the humans or the Trivex could comprehend. It was the source of the signal, the source of everything. Kane stepped forward, his breath catching as the realization hit him. They hadn't just found a weapon. They had found the key to something far more dangerous. The machine wasn't just a relic, it was a sentinel, a guardian of something ancient. And it was awakening. As the machine's core pulsed faster, the ground trembled once more. Kane knew that whatever happened next would change the fate of the galaxy. Whatever this ancient force was, it was not content to remain hidden any longer. The air in the chamber was thick with tension, the very ground beneath them trembling with a rhythm that seemed almost sentient. The colossal machine before them hummed with an unnatural energy, its core glowing brighter with each passing second. Kane could feel the power coursing through the room, a force so alien and vast that it made his skin crawl. It wasn't just a machine. It was something alive, something that had been waiting for them to awaken it. "This is it," Kane muttered, his voice low and tight. His eyes scanned the pulsating machine, every instinct warning him to retreat. But they couldn't turn back now. They had come too far. Beside him, General Sylar's soldiers stood motionless, their weapons still drawn, though their faces betrayed the same unease that Kane felt. This wasn't a simple technological relic. This was a weapon, or something far worse. The machine's energy surged again, sending another tremor through the chamber. A low, guttural sound echoed from deep within the structure, almost like a growl, and the symbols carved into the walls began to shift. The writing twisted and turned, reconfiguring into new patterns that glowed with an eerie, pulsating light. Kane could see the shapes of creatures, ships, and symbols. Impressions of battles, of ancient wars. It was like a history of destruction unfolding before them, a timeline of calamities etched into the very walls of the chamber. "It's alive," Kane whispered. The machine was more than just a weapon. It was a repository of knowledge, an ancient AI designed for something unspeakable. Sylar's voice crackled through his comms, his tone strained. "Captain, we are not prepared for this. The readings, this is beyond anything we've ever encountered. We need to back away now." But Kane couldn't move. He felt his feet glued to the ground, his mind racing with the realization that they were standing on the precipice of something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The machine's hum had shifted into a resonant frequency, vibrating through the very air around them. They had triggered it, and now it was waking up. Suddenly, a blinding light shot from the core of the machine, flooding the entire chamber. Kane had to shield his eyes as the room filled with an overwhelming energy. He could feel the force of it pressing in on him, suffocating him. The light intensified, and with it came a voice, cold, ancient, and alien. "You have awakened me." The voice echoed in their minds, a sound that was both mechanical and organic, ancient and timeless. Kane's heart raced. The machine was speaking to them. But who, or what, was it? "I am the Sentinel," the voice continued, the last remnant of a civilization long forgotten. "I was built to protect, to preserve, and to destroy. You have broken the seal. You are now my responsibility." Kane's blood ran cold as he exchanged a glance with Sylar. The Trivex general's expression was unreadable, but Kane could sense the unease radiating from him. This was no mere relic. It was something far more dangerous, something far beyond their understanding. The machine's core began to spin, and its energy surged again, amplifying to a level that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the chamber. Kane could hear the hum of the energy growing louder, felt the shockwaves reverberating through his body. "Retreat," Kane shouted, snapping out of his trance. He reached for his communicator, barking orders at his fleet. "Get everyone out of here now. This thing is beyond us." But it was too late. The Sentinel's massive form began to stir, its limbs shifting into motion as the ancient machine slowly stood up, its towering figure casting a shadow over them all. Its presence was overwhelming, like the weight of 1,000 years pressing down on their shoulders. The walls of the chamber seemed to bend and warp, the very space around them distorting with the raw energy the machine was channeling. "I warned you," the voice rumbled. "I warned you all." With a sudden, deafening roar, the machine released a burst of energy so intense that it fractured the very ground beneath their feet. Cain barely had time to react before the blast sent shockwaves through the chamber, throwing him to the ground. The force of the blast knocked everyone back, and the tunnel entrance collapsed behind them, sealing them inside the chamber with the sentinel. For a moment, all was silent, save for the ringing in Cain's ears and the lingering hum of the machine. When he regained his bearings, he saw that Siler's soldiers were scattered, some knocked unconscious, others struggling to get back to their feet. The machine stood towering over them, its energy crackling with the promise of destruction. "We need to stop this thing," Cain muttered, pulling himself up, his body sore from the blast. "It's not just a weapon. It's a force of nature." Siler nodded grimly, his expression hardening. "We cannot fight this alone. We will need to combine our forces, human and Trivex, if we are to stand any chance." Cain knew what needed to be done. The machine might have been ancient, but it was not invincible. They had no choice but to work together, pushing their forces to the limit, to prevent the Sentinel from bringing about the very destruction it was designed to unleash. The galaxy was on the brink of a new war. And the true enemy, this ancient force, had finally revealed itself. Now, it was a race against time to stop the machine before its awakening could spell the end for everything they knew.